Thank you, Ayu. So despite the fact that I look now much older than my headshot, I'm Andrew McCormick, the center head for the BIS Innovation Hub in Singapore. It's an absolute honor to share the stage with these three amazing leaders in the payments industry, each representing, I think, very unique constituencies and have great perspective on the future of cross-border payments in a digital age. We have an incumbent from the SWIFT, a regional visionary from P27, and a digital giant from Asia, who are here to face off over what the future of cross-border payments are going to look like. Saskia de Volder is head of Europe North for SWIFT, responsible for GPI, Global Payments Innovation, and Market Infrastructures in EMEA. And prior to joining SWIFT, was a VP of Global Account Management at MasterCard. SWIFT obviously needs no introduction as a member-owned collective serving 11,000 financial institutions and really critical infrastructure for the global financial ecosystem. Paula de Silva, CEO of P27, Nordic Payments. Paula has 30 years of experience in the financial sector, and prior to joining P27, held senior positions at SEB Bank. And P27, for those who don't know, is a joint commercial bank-led initiative that aims to build pan-Nordic real-time payments infrastructure for cross-border payments in the Nordic currencies and the euro. And Carrie Suen, who is a global senior advisor at Ant. And Carrie joined Ant in 2014 and is in charge of global affairs and oversees legal and privacy functions at Ant International Business Group. Ant, of course, serves over 1 billion, many more users, 80 million merchants, and recently launched an interesting cross-border payments service in Asia that we'll get into a little bit later. So we'll dive right in, and cross-border payments are, of course, a critical area of focus for the G20, for the BIS Innovation Hub, the FSB, the CPMI, and amongst other things, we've tried to set quantifiable goals for reducing fees, improving access, speed, and enhancing transparency. So we'll start by focusing on the pain points themselves, and from your unique perspectives in the market, how do you see the key problems that you're solving? Who are the users and clients that are most affected? And what are the biggest challenges in overcoming these challenges with the infrastructure, the regulation, or those deeper layers? And maybe I'll start with you, Saskia.
Thank you, Andrew. First of all, maybe a little something on SWIFT. We are a cooperative. That means we don't go for profit maximization. So there is something in the private sector that doesn't really go 100% for profit. And I would not call us an incumbent. I would call us the first fintech that was there almost 50 years ago, because we transformed the world from manual and telex into automation. So I think that's the first fintech. Okay. And we continue to be a bit of a fintech, but maybe a bit indeed. I'll come to that later on, a little bit on the different side. But what do we see as issues with cross-border payments? Our industry is about, all the banks, 11,500 members, more than 200 countries and territories. But it's only since a couple of years that we've been able to actually track and trace transactions end to end. Before, there were messages. We could not see where they originated and where they ended. Since GPI, we can. And what do we see as reasons why transactions are not that fast? Well, there are a number of them. But first of all, I want to correct. Cross-border transactions are not that slow. Over 60% of the transactions over SWIFT are done in 30 minutes. I think the KPI of the G20 or the FSB is 75% done in an hour. So actually, that's not that bad. But yes, there is still a certain percentage that is not executed in those 30 minutes and even can take up to almost a day. And what are the reasons that we see is, I think the first one is currency and capital controls, because most of the delay is on the recipient side. So the transaction is executed quite fast into the country of the beneficiary bank, but that is where then the delay takes place. The beneficiary depositing the money on the account of the beneficiary is due to currency and capital controls, is the first one. Two is the capability of the bank to process 24/7, or batch processing that is still there in certain banks. But also the RTGS, I think it was mentioned very early that RTGSs could look at extending opening hours. They're not always open. So if we want to have finality, if we want to have settlement, the RTGS needs to be involved. So there are still a number of issues that come into play to increase the speed. Now, I also want to say that the industry overall does already certain elements which, make that speed go faster over the last few years. And I think I need to mention common language. Well, first of all, I'm Belgium, so I speak Dutch, like a few of you here, I think, from the Netherlands. But if I would speak my language, you probably more than half of the room would have no idea what I talk about. So we agreed on a common language being English. Well, last weekend, we started a migration to ISO 20022. Europe, Canada, a few other countries as well started a migration, but also on the cross-border space, SWIFT started the migration to ISO 20022. And that migration is important as a common language, but also to make sure that we all can use those data elements for the future. And so I think that will help as well to increase speeds in the future.
Fantastic. So the first FinTech, I'll make sure to update my speaking notes next time. Yeah. Paula, can I go to you next and give us your perspective on the pain points that you're solving for?
How long do we have now?
23 minutes and 39 seconds.
But I think there are quite many. I mean, to start with, we talk about cross-border. If you are in China, you have, 1.3 billion people. They're domestic. Why are they different from the others? If I want to pay and I have a merchant in the country and then I have it outside, how can we harmonize that? I think the banking industry is today financing things that they don't want to finance involuntarily. And one of the things, you use ISO 20022, and that's great to migrate to that, but we need to harmonize so that we actually have a chance of monitoring what we do. And we don't do that today in a good way in the whole industry. So in that sense, I think it's quite important that we standardize across. And to your point, it's a common language. So let's say that if English is a common language, then it goes cross-border, right? So we need to enable that in a good way. So the pain points are quite many because of that. I used to work for this quite international Swedish bank. I think they had 600 payment types that didn't talk to each other, X amount of payment systems and so forth. So we need to really go in there, and it helps what SWIFT is doing for sure and setting standards. But then we need to harmonize across. So domestic payments is a big pain. That's one pain. The other pain is, of course, that we have a regulation that is quite different. So it's like if we had a traffic system that, in this country, the stop sign looks like this. It's red and it's 6 corners, and the other country it's something else, completely different. It's green and it's round. We wouldn't understand, and that's a little bit the same as we have here. And even in our small countries up in the Nordics, we are still quite scattered. So that's a pain point that P27 obviously will be trying to solve together with, and absolutely not proprietary. It's an open space, and we need a lot of collaboration. And again, harmonize the standards that the global organizations are setting. But we need to do that cross-currency within and outside the countries, I think.
For sure. Carrie, I'll go to you next.
First of all, thank you for having us here. And just responding to Siska, actually, now with all the crypto disruption, I feel like what Alipay and Group is doing is we almost become incumbent in a sense. So I'm going to be quite, in a very layman term, I think one key objectives that we're looking at here right now, all the efforts that G20 is pulling together is really to enhance the financial inclusion. But I want to take a step back and look at the bigger picture, right? When you say financial inclusion, who exactly are you solving the pain points for? I think that is a very important question that we should be very clear. And from our standpoint, from our experience, we are operating a very vibrant but also very diverse environment with banks trying to go digital, with big techs, small techs, fintechs, all coming together to try to join this fintech movement. So and who are on the receiving side? Who are the one actually using the last mile delivery of service? I think that is something that I feel may not always be highlighted. I think one of the panelists mentioned merchants are also quite key to the whole development. So when we talk about like who are suffering, I think global SMEs, they form 90% of the companies worldwide. They actually contribute social impact, employing 50% of our population, and contribute 40% of the GDP. But I think there's a lot of legacy system that were not really built for them. But yet, because of pandemic, I think there's more emphasis on looking into SME economy. So I think payment itself is the first step. And let alone all the accessibility to financing, to credibility, to trust data, etc. that we are going to talk about. But I think, so looking at from SME's perspective, they need to have that digital mindset. But digital mindset does not just come naturally. So I think we talk about cost, accessibility, speed, etc. But I think one thing that was not emphasis is the user journey experience. Because if you talk to a woman entrepreneur in a village doing handcrafts, for them that experience is very different. Like how do they even get onboarded, to get used to that digital capacity to use the technology itself so they can get a chance to access the system. I think that is something that currently, I think this legacy system was not built for, but I think this is good. I'm very privileged to be here. I think it's very encouraging. I think there's a collaboration here to look into, how we can upgrade that system, and then on top of that, how can we encourage more innovation on a very stable, resilient, and also safe environment. So I think that's something that we should keep in mind on when we look at the next generation of financial system, who are the stakeholders that are within that ecosystem, and what that end-to-end flow is going to look like. And from an architecture perspective, how do we build one layer on top of the other, and then at the end, when the product financial service is being offered to the end users, then they can actually use it and it's implementable.
There's a lot there to pick up on, and maybe what your comments there, Carrie, about the commercial layer is actually more nuanced. We tend to be fairly bank-centric in our thinking, and guilty as charged. But if you think about the commercial layer being banks, it's telcos in some countries in Southeast Asia that are offering banking services, basically payment services. It's big tech players and fintech players, and then maybe at this outer layer there's this experimental layer that kind of is the crypto sphere or whatever. And that model, that mental model that reminds me of is this idea of pace layering, and there's kind of the regulation and the infrastructure at the core, but then the commercial and the experimental layer, and the outer layers move very quickly and the inner layers kind of move rather slowly. And our mission is to try to figure out a way to make sure that middle layer responds to change and adapts to change somehow. So there's something there that I'll have to sort of noodle away on, but I think that it's really relevant, and certainly now spending a bit of time in Southeast Asia, I sort of now appreciate the magnitude of the services that are being offered to un- and underbanked populations, hundreds and hundreds of millions of people being now serviced through digital payment means, and we don't have a great access model to be fair. So from that perspective, if you think about that pace of change at the infrastructure layer, and as the first fintech, Saskia, I'll start with you in 1977 when you guys started operating. How does SWIFT kind of reconcile that infrastructure change management program, and what are you working on specifically to try to evolve those services to be more digitally native and ready for different access models in the future?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And yes, it's true, we're there since 1977. We did the first transaction. And we need to, first of all, I think our role is to guarantee stability. The exchange of money is there, and nobody talks about SWIFT when everything goes right, but hell, everybody talks about us if we're not there a couple of minutes. And especially when times are volatile, we see the importance of the role that we have. And coming back to our role is also the trust. You know, the last 2 weeks, I would say, there's a lot of discussion about trust in the system, you know, and we give trust to everybody which is operating, which is market infrastructures, whether it's central banks, whether it's commercial banks, whether it's, you know, everybody playing in the securities or the trade. So we give trust because everybody is guaranteed a layer of security, a layer of interoperability. I think Maya was talking earlier about cyber protection, when we designed the whole CSP, where we looked also at outside of SWIFT protection against cyber, not only at ourselves, but also to every single bank and every single country and every corporate and everybody dealing on our network. How can we deliver the highest protection? So it's about trust that we deliver in our system. So that is, I think, fundamental. It needs to stay because that's still the way, you know, everybody exchanges money, or actually data, because SWIFT doesn't move money. We move data around to make sure that you can execute payments. But then, yes, we want to innovate. And maybe the difference between a fintech and the fintech called SWIFT is that when we innovate, we do that with our community. We do that in agreement with, you know, all these banks around the world. And we move them all together at the same time. You know, we don't move 20 of them and we say, hello, here we are, we have found a brilliant solution. We move it actually cross-border. So if you look at GPI, which is like 3-4 years ago, you know, where we can now track and trace, then we also detect all these issues. So coming back to some of those issues, how can we make sure, we think with the community about how can we come to, like, our strategy and the G20 objectives is, how can we come to instant frictionless payments? Well, I think you know that as well from your project is if you do pre-validation, you can already anticipate, you know, that there's less issues when afterwards you do that transaction. You can exchange already certain information, verification of certain information. So, you know, we're moving the community and helping the community with doing pre-validation. We want to build, like SWIFT Go, you know, more SLA, but based on that layer of GPI, which we have, I think, demonstrated globally that it really works, that we can track and trace, that we can see issues, we can solve issues. So if we make SLAs tighter, we can actually try to make it easier for everybody, as you mentioned, in the chain, whether it's a consumer, whether it's a merchant, to know more how it will work, what to expect, and to guarantee for the banks, you know, the easy execution of the promise that they have made to their customer. Because finally, when we deliver those services to banks, they make promises to their customers, whether it's a corporate or a consumer, and they want to keep those. So we're looking at pre-validation, and then coming back to I think the topic that has been discussed a lot, CBDCs, digital currencies. Great, I think, you know, everybody's looking at renewing, but we'll still have, for definitely a number of years, we need interoperability between that new system and the existing system. And that is, I think, where we have been working with like Banque de France and Bundesbank and others, and a lot of commercial banks as well, to test how would that work. We want to guarantee stability of the financial system today and tomorrow. We exchange data. We want to protect that data on our transaction manager, make sure it's well protected there. And I think one of the previous panels talked about the whole data and the protection of it and privacy. Well, we want to make sure that on our transaction manager is well protected, but that we pass on what is required for a cross-border payment, because cross-border payment has two differences from a domestic one. It's doing the FX, you need a currency conversion, and two is the whole compliance requirements. And so we need to make sure that that data is there available for everybody to fast, but well, and trustworthy execute their compliance requirements. So yes, innovation and CBDC interoperability is high on our agenda, but it remains at the top level. And as I said, we slowly move the ground layer, but we want to guarantee that SWIFT is there and that, you know, the system can work today and for the next coming years.
For sure. For those keeping track, it was officially 17 minutes and 51 seconds before CBDC came up in this conversation. But thank you for that, though. Paula, I'll go to you next. You know, as an emerging regional infrastructure provider, what are your kind of key lessons learned thus far on your journey?
But I liked your mental journey there about the pace and how quickly and how slow. We are slow, for sure. We are not setting standards, but the mission is to transform the market. So it's not to launch a product, and that takes time. You need to syndicate. Swedes are known for consensus. I think Cecilia can say that. So it's quite important that it's smooth, and that's what we are trying to do. And therefore, it's 101 banks in the region,
Okay.
5 different countries. Over time, we are 3 right now that are adhering to it. Quite a lot of different legacy systems, even though all currencies are basically fully digital already today. For those of you that have been in the Nordics, try to pay with a bill, you notice that it's impossible, more or less. Which means that you have a system already that we need to go from. And 1959, the Swedish ACH was built. So it's quite cool, old, maybe even older fintech.
Maybe that's the second fintech.
Yeah, exactly, second fintech. But even so, it's quite slow. It's quite scattered. So the transformation takes time. You need to onboard everyone, and not only the big banks, but really the small banks as well. We are slow, but we are proud of being slow in a way, making sure that everyone is on board. And then, of course, we collaborate with the Swedish Central Bank and the other central banks in the region, setting the bar for how much resilience and so forth there needs to be, together with the monitoring entities as well. So there is a lot of collaboration. There needs to be a lot of collaboration in this space. So based on the standards that you guys set globally, we can adhere to it locally, but also to then satisfy the local needs. So hopefully a combination of that in an open space. Yeah. Big task.
Sure, absolutely. You mentioned kind of the speed in which you can launch infrastructures, and certainly in a banking context, I totally agree. It feels slow at times, and I've been there personally as well. But Carrie, one of the things that we do observe in your world is you guys do move a bit faster than us, and I think that's interesting to see, because this digital wallet universe is somehow inherently faster moving, serving vast numbers of customers. There's still KYC and appropriate controls on who those users are, but is Alipay Plus essentially trying to be kind of an infrastructure for digital wallets in this realm, and is that your kind of answer to what the digital future looks like for cross-border payments? Are you now an infrastructure? Are you the third? 1, 2, 3?
I'm glad you asked.
Yeah.
I mean, from our perspective, because we have our own wallet in China, and what we're doing outside of China is actually a bit different. So we had that brief discussion before. I think from our point of view, actually the digital platform, whether it's wallet, banking apps, or e-commerce, they constitute an important part of that whole financial infrastructure, if you look at that way, because it provides a very simple access point to the end users. And from that perspective, there will be valuable data set that can be gathered, obviously subject to privacy protection and consent. But to many people, especially those unbanked, that actually gives them access to the market, which they have the ability to start to accumulate, the data, the credibility, and hopefully that will bring more value-adding service to them. So from Alipay Plus perspective, we are a B2B solution that aims to help propel these domestic wallets, banking apps to go cross-border. Because I have an ex-colleague sitting right there from Anne. So she left us 5 years, but we have been looking into this space since 2015. It is not easy. Just if you are trying to build one corridor, you have to deal with probably 3 or even 4 different jurisdictions. So that differentiation in the regulatory requirements itself is quite burdensome. But we dealt with a lot of wallets who are growing, who are trying to get ready for that cross-border global trade business. It's not easy. Today, if you're number one in your market, then you have the choice to connect with the global merchants that you choose, where you think your users are going to. But it actually sucks up a lot of cost and resource. So a lot of these wallets, they're very money-burning business, even in the domestic market. So they don't really have all those bandwidth to deal with all these like cross-border issues and system building. So what we are there to actually to help bridge that gap. And they have a choice to go directly, but they can also use our service. And on top of that, as all of the global policy makers would know, when you go cross-border, the risk, the regulatory requirements also have a high bar. So a lot of these digital wallets, they need that technical capability to meet those requirements, even on the SLA, right? How to ensure there's a cross-border seamless experience. It's actually all very technical. It's not so easy, just switch on a button and then it will happen. So there's a lot of computing processing system required, a lot of like product features that require to maintain that seamless cross-border experience for those wallet users. So what we have done is actually we also license our proprietary license technology on AML, screening, risk management, on eKYC. So in a way we can help them to step up to that higher threshold that is required for that cross-border payment processing. So I think what I'm trying to say is I think from my personal view is the cross-border payment space will continue to be fragmented because there are a lot of different needs depending where your economy stands and what are the political agenda that is set for that sovereignty. But what is important is to have this layer of application where you can actually be interoperable with each other, what P27 and SWIFT are doing, but also to have that solution to bridge those gaps, and hopefully will be a more sustainable business model for all the ecosystem players that are coming into this cross-border payment space.
Okay, well, we have a few minutes left, and I know there's lots of smart folks in the room, and I think we have some time for a Q&A. So I want to see if there's any really tough questions that you guys could throw at my panelists in these last few minutes. I think we have someone who can bring a microphone around. I'm not sure who, but oh, I see. I believe that's Jesse from MasterCard.
So you're all representatives of private, or in the case of SWIFT, cooperative entities engaged in this space. We have lots of attendees here from the public sector. I suppose, if there was one thing that you would ask of them in terms of the role that the public sector can play, particularly perhaps around the space of regulatory harmonization, what would it be?
Who wants to start?
I can start. We are, trying to go cross-border. 3 countries might not seem like a lot, but very, very different at the start. So you have 2 countries with ACHs, 1 country without, Finland, to have direct connections. Totally different views on most of the things. Actually, now being much more harmonized, as maybe we also force it into the system that one needs to have the same view, and also the central banks looking into what's happening in the world, harmonizing, demanding more or less the same thing. So that is needed, to your point, and as I said before, one needs to have the same traffic light system, otherwise it's difficult to deliver, to your point as well. So
okay.
That would be the wish.
Carrie, what about you? What's your one ask of the BIS?
I think Sandbox approach is a very good platform to come together to look at that. I think what Cecily alluded earlier on, BIS is also very ready to get into more of the private sector space. So I think now that line is getting a bit muddled, right? So can we have like a global Sandbox approach where parties can come together to experiment and talk about issues, and then see how we can all use data, use technology to facilitate with the risk management point of view, right? I think also there was some mention, I think we need a baseline understanding of where the minimal risk threshold lies, and it could be activity-based, right? What MAS has done with the PSA legislation. So I think we just need to have that common language to understand what cross-border transaction looks like, what are the essential data set that is reasonably requested so we can actually clear and settle a cross-border transaction. Even that, I think there's a lot of different interpretations across countries.
Saskia, anything to add?
Well, first of all, I think they both made already great points. And I would say, to add to that is indeed, let's work more together. Let's try to find solutions together for some of the points. I think in some areas we do, but I think we can go further. And especially these are, everything which is related to regulation, compliance is non-competitive space. It's a space where we can only all win instead than lose if we really work together. So I don't think that has anything to do with commercial or any other thing. So I would say, go for a bit more exchange, listen to each other and work together, and maybe sandbox and testing is a good way of maybe trying that more.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We're out of time, and appreciate all your wise comments and wisdom. Thank you so much.